The Japanese destroyer's searchlight swept across the water like the finger of death. Missing our bow by mere feet, we held our breath, engines cut to idle, drifting in the darkness off Villa Lavella. 23 American sailors pressed against the deck of PT-164, trying to become invisible. In the cargo holds of the 3 Japanese transports behind that destroyer, nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers sat unaware that their journey to reinforce Kolombangara was about to end in the black waters of the Solomon Sea. The date was July 19, 1943, and in exactly 4 minutes we would unleash hell from the shadows. My hands gripped the twin .50 caliber mount so tightly my knuckles ACHD. Beside me, Ensign Robert Dutch Vanderberg whispered coordinates to our skipper, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M. McPhersonson. The green phosphorescent glow of our compass was the only light we dared show. Behind us, hidden in the moon's shadow cast by Villa Lavella's volcanic peaks, PT-168 and PT-171 waited for our signal. We were America's secret weapons, and the Japanese Navy was about to discover why darkness was no longer their ally. My name is Chief Petty Officer Thomas Tom Harrigan, United States Navy Reserve, and I was one of the first to prove that small wooden boats could sink steel warships. People often ask me what it was like being part of the most closely guarded naval secret of 1943. The truth is, we were too busy trying not to die to think about making history. We only knew that if we failed tonight, those 8,000 Japanese soldiers would reach Kolombangara, where they would slaughter American boys trying to take that strategic airfield. Every torpedo we carried represented hundreds of American lives that might be saved. Every enemy transport we sent to the bottom meant parents back home who wouldn't receive that dreaded telegram from the War Department. To understand how 3 boats smaller than most private yachts could challenge the Imperial Japanese Navy at the height of its power, you need to understand what we were up against in the summer of 1943. The Japanese had turned night fighting into an art form. Since their victory at Savo Island the previous August, where they sank 4 Allied cruisers without losing a ship, they owned the darkness in the Solomon Islands. Their sailors trained for years in night combat, learning to fight without radar, using only keen eyesight and practiced coordination. They called their nighttime supply runs the Tokyo Express, and we called them the Rat Run. Either way, they moved troops and supplies with near impunity once the sun went down. The American Navy had bigger ships, better radar, and more firepower. But we were losing the night war. Our admirals, trained in the traditional battle line tactics of Jutland and Manila Bay, couldn't adapt quickly enough to this new kind of warfare. Our cruisers and destroyers, designed for fleet actions in open ocean, were sitting ducks in the confined waters of the Solomons. We needed something different, something the Japanese wouldn't expect. That something was being built in secret boatyards from New Orleans to New York, and it would revolutionize naval warfare forever. The PT boat, Patrol Torpedo Boat, was born from desperation and American ingenuity. At 80 feet long and 20 feet wide, they were constructed from laminated mahogany plywood, not steel. 3 Packard 5112 engines, modified versions of the Liberty aircraft engine, pushed them to speeds over 45 knots, faster than any torpedo or conventional warship. We carried 421-in torpedo tubes with Mark 13 torpedoes, a 20mm Aerocon cannon, 450 caliber machine guns, and enough ammunition to raise hell for about 15 minutes of sustained combat. After that, we better be heading home or heading to the bottom. I first saw a PT boat in February 1943. At the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron's Training Center in Melville, Rhode Island. I was a destroyer sailor fresh from convoy duty in the North Atlantic when the Navy asked for volunteers for hazardous duty with experimental vessels. The recruiter wouldn't tell us what these vessels were, only that the casualty rate was expected to be over 50%. Out of 200 volunteers, they selected 40. I made the cut because I could navigate by stars and had small boat experience from growing up on Chesapeake Bay. The first time I stepped aboard PT-164, I thought the Navy had lost its mind. This wasn't a warship. It was a glorified speedboat with delusions of grandeur. The hull was wood in a war of steel and armor. The living quarters were so cramped that hot bunking wasn't just common, it was mandatory. There was no armor protection except for some sheet metal around the bridge. One good hit from anything larger than a rifle bullet and we'd be matchsticks floating on the water. But then I met MC Fersenson and everything changed. Mac was 28 years old, ancient by PT boat standards, with eyes that had seen too much already. He'd been at Pearl Harbor aboard the destroyer USS Shore when the Japanese attacked, had fought at Midway and volunteered for PT boats because, in his words, "I'm tired of being a target. Time to become the hunter." Mac understood something that would take the rest of us weeks to learn. PT boats weren't meant to fight like conventional warships. We were maritime guerrillas, seagoing assassins who struck from ambush and vanished before the enemy could react. Our crew was a collection of misfits and specialists who'd never have served together on a regular Navy vessel. Dutch Vanderberg, our executive officer, was a Yale mathematics professor who could calculate torpedo firing solutions in his head faster than most men could work a slide rule. Chief motor machinist's mate Carlos Charlie Mendoza had been building racing engines in Los Angeles before the war and could make our temperamental Packards purr like kittens or roar like lions depending on what we needed. Radio man second class. William Sparks Patterson came from the submarine service where he'd learned to operate radios in absolute silence. Our torpedo man, gunner's mate, First Class Patrick Paddy O'Brien, was an artist with those mechanical fish. Each Mark 13 torpedo weighed 2,200 and cost as much as a house back home. Paddy treated them better than most men treated their wives, constantly adjusting, cleaning, and sweet-talking them. "These beauties," he'd say while polishing the bronze propellers, "are the only reason the Japs will take us seriously. One shot, one kill, or we're just expensive target practice." The rest of our 12-man crew included 2 more gunners, an engineer, a cook who doubled as a medic, and 3 seamen who did everything else. We were blacks and whites, city boys and farm kids, high school dropouts and college graduates, united by one simple fact. We were all volunteers who'd signed up knowing we probably wouldn't survive the war. Training at Melville was brutal and unforgiving. The Navy had learned from early PT boat losses that enthusiasm wasn't enough. We needed to be faster, smarter, and more vicious than anything the Japanese could throw at us. We practiced high-speed attacks until we could launch torpedoes accurately while bouncing across waves at 40 knots. We learned to navigate by sound and instinct when tropical squalls reduced visibility to zero. Most importantly, we learned to think like pirates rather than sailors. Commander James Wild Jim Patterson, who ran the training program, had survived the Philippines campaign and escaped Corridor on one of the last PT boats out. He had a simple training philosophy. The Japanese expect you to fight fair. Don't. They expect you to follow naval tradition. Don't. They expect you to be afraid of the dark. Make them afraid instead. He taught us that our greatest weapons weren't our torpedoes, but surprise, speed, and sheer audacity. We arrived at our forward base at Renova on June 30, 1943, just as the invasion of New Georgia was beginning. The base was nothing more than a fuel dump, some camouflaged Quonset huts, and a rough dock hidden under palm ferns. The first thing we noticed was the smell, rotting vegetation, diesel fuel, and the sweet stench of tropical decay. The second thing was the sound of artillery fire from New Georgia, where Marines were dying to take the Munda airfield. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9. Our unit consisted of 12 PT boats tasked with interdicting Japanese reinforcement attempts in the Central Solomons. Our mission sounded simple: Patrol the waters between the major Japanese bases and sink anything flying the rising sun. The reality was far more complex. These waters were a maze of coral reefs, volcanic islands, and hidden Japanese strong points. The enemy had seaplanes for reconnaissance, coast watchers on every major island, and destroyer squadrons specifically trained to hunt PT boats. Our first patrol on July 5 was a disaster. 3 boats, including ours, attempted to intercept a Japanese convoy near Visu. We were spotted by an enemy float plane before we could get into attack position. And suddenly, 4 destroyers were bearing down on us with searchlights blazing and guns firing. We scattered like rabbits, racing through a gauntlet of shell splashes. PT-158 took a direct hit from a 5-inch shell and disintegrated. 12 men gone in an instant, blown to fragments along with their boat. We spent 4 hours dodging through reefs and islands before finally escaping. No torpedoes fired, no enemy ships damaged, and we'd lost a boat and crew. That night, huddled in our base at Renova, Mac gathered us together. "We learned something important today," he said quietly. "We can't fight them like destroyers fight each other. We're not built for gun duels. We strike from ambush or we don't strike at all." It was a hard lesson, paid for in blood, but it would shape every mission that followed. Over the next 2 weeks, we developed new tactics through trial and error. We learned to use the island's radar shadows to mask our approach. We discovered that shutting down 2 engines and running on one reduced our noise signature dramatically. Most importantly, we figured out how to coordinate attacks between multiple boats using simple light signals that the Japanese couldn't intercept. The intelligence network supporting us was remarkable. Australian coast watchers hiding in the hills of Japanese-occupied islands would radio enemy ship movements. Native Solomon Islanders risking execution if caught would paddle their canoes out to meet us with information about Japanese positions. Sometimes we'd get decrypt intelligence from Pearl Harbor, giving us exact convoy schedules, but most of the time we hunted by instinct and experience. The PT boats were still classified as secret weapons in July 1943. Official Navy communications never mentioned us by name, referring only to small craft or mosquito boats. The Japanese knew something was hitting their convoys, but their initial reports described us as submarines or mines. They couldn't believe the Americans would send wooden speedboats against steel warships. That ignorance was our greatest advantage. On the night of July 18, Coastwatcher reporting indicated a major Japanese reinforcement convoy would run through Blackett Strait, heading for VA on Kolombangara. This was the target we'd been waiting for. Multiple transports with minimal escort, forced to pass through narrow waters where their superior numbers wouldn't help them. Mac volunteered our boat to lead the attack along with PT-168 skippered by Lieutenant Henry Hank Bramwell and PT-171 under Lieutenant Junior Grade Joseph Joey Antonelli. The briefing that evening was tense. Intelligence estimated 3 large transports escorted by 1 or 2 destroyers carrying elements of the Japanese 13th Regiment, elite troops who'd fought in China and the Philippines. These weren't construction battalions or supply troops. These were frontline soldiers who would make our Marines' lives hell on New Georgia. Commander William Bill Specht, our squadron leader, made it clear. "Gentlemen, this convoy cannot reach VA. I don't care if you have to ram those transports. They go to the bottom tonight." As the sun set on July 19, painting the sky blood red over the Solomons, we made our final preparations. Paddy O'Brien ran through his torpedo checklist for the 5th time, setting the Mark 13s for a depth of 10 feet and the speed for 28 knots, optimal settings for hitting a loaded transport. Charlie Mendoza had our engines tuned to perfection, mufflers installed to reduce noise. Dutch Vanderberg plotted and replotted our attack approach, calculating currents, wind, and the moon's position. I checked my machine guns one last time, ensuring the ammunition belts fed smoothly. We loaded nothing but armor-piercing and incendiary rounds. Regular ball ammunition was useless against steel ships, but API rounds could penetrate bridge windows, start fires, and suppress enemy gun crews. Every fifth round was a tracer, creating lines of fire that looked like deadly fireworks in the night sky. At 20-30 hours, we slipped our moorings and headed into the gathering darkness. The three boats moved in column formation, engines muffled to a low rumble. As we cleared Renever Harbor, Mac ordered us to test weapons. The night erupted briefly in gunfire as 12 machine guns and 3 20mm cannons barked into the empty sea. Then silence again, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of our engines and the hiss of water along our hulls. The ocean was rougher than we'd hoped, with a 2-foot chop that would make torpedo accuracy challenging. But it also meant our wakes would be harder to spot, and the wave action would mask our engine noise. Every advantage mattered when you were 80 feet of plywood attacking 400 feet of steel. By 2,300 hours, we reached our ambush position off the north coast of Villa Lavella. Mac cut engines to idle, and we drifted in the darkness, waiting. The only sounds were water lapping against our hull and the distant rumble of artillery from New Georgia. Then at 2,347 hours, Sparks Patterson picked up a transmission from Coast Watcher reporting, 3 large ships, 2 escorts bearing 280, speed 18 knots, range 15 miles from your position. The hunt was on. Max started 2 engines, keeping them at low throttle as we moved to intercept. The mathematics were simple, but crucial. The enemy convoy was making 18 knots on a steady course. We could make 35 knots without creating too much wake. If we positioned ourselves correctly, we'd intercept them just as they entered the narrowest part of Blackett Strait, where they'd have no room to maneuver. At 00018 hours on July 20th, Dutch spotted them through his binoculars, dark shapes against the starfield, exactly where they should be. The Japanese were maintaining perfect formation. 2 destroyers in the lead, 3 transports following with another destroyer bringing up the rear. They showed no lights, but their size and regular spacing made them easy to track once you knew where to look. Mac's plan was elegantly simple and incredibly dangerous. PT-168 would attack from the port side. PT-171 from starboard, while we went straight up the middle after the lead transport. It meant passing between the escort destroyers, literally threading the needle between death on either side, but if it worked, we'd cause maximum confusion and have clear shots at all 3 transports. "All ahead slow," Mac whispered. We crept forward at 5 knots, barely moving, letting the convoy come to us. At 2,000 yards, we could hear their engines, the deep thrumming of massive diesels pushing thousands of tons through the water. At 1,500 yards, we could see individual details. The pagode-style bridge of the lead destroyer, the cargo booms on the transports, even figures moving on deck. At 1,000 yards, Mac gave the signal. 3 clicks on the radio and all 3 PT boats surged forward simultaneously. Our engines roared from idle to full throttle in seconds, lifting our bow out of the water as we accelerated to attack speed. The night shattered as we raced toward the enemy convoy at 40 knots. 3 small craft challenging steel giants. The Japanese were caught completely off guard. Their lookouts, trained to spot submarines or approaching destroyers, never expected attackers moving this fast from this close. We were inside their formation before they could react, racing between the escort destroyers at point-blank range. I opened fire with my twin 50s, raking the bridge of the nearest destroyer, seeing my traces punch through windows and ricochet off steel. Fire 1, Fire 2. Patty launched our first 2 Mark 13 torpedoes at 600 yards. Impossibly close range where missing was almost impossible. The mechanical fish leapt from their tubes and splashed into the water, their props already spinning at full speed. Twin wakes of phosphorescent bubbles strut. A converted passenger liner carrying over 3,000 Japanese soldiers. The destroyer to our starboard finally reacted, swinging its searchlight toward us. The brilliant white beam found us instantly, blinding in its intensity. Immediately, their 25mm anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Green traces reaching out for us like deadly fingers. Shells splashed around us, so close that spray soaked everyone on deck. Then our torpedoes hit. The first struck the transport just after the bridge with a thunderous explosion that lit up the night like lightning. The second hit amidship, breaking the ship's back instantly. The 8,000-ton vessel lifted partially out of the water, then split in half, both sections immediately beginning to sink. Through the searchlight glare and gunfire, we could see hundreds of Japanese soldiers spilling into the water, their screams audible even over our engines. PT-168 struck next. Both Mark 13 torpedoes slamming into the second transport. That ship loaded with ammunition and fuel for the VA garrison exploded like a volcano. The blast was so powerful it knocked me off my feet and a wave of superheated air washed over our boat. Flaming debris rained down around us, starting small fires on our wooden deck that we frantically stomped out. The Japanese destroyers were responding now, but they faced an impossible problem. We were too close for their main guns to depress low enough to hit us, and we were mixed in with their own transports, making it dangerous for them to fire. Their solution was to try ramming us, using their superior size to simply run us down. The nearest destroyer turned hard toward us, its knife bow aimed directly at our beam. At the combined closure speed, we had maybe 10 seconds before impact. Mac threw the wheel hard right and pushed the throttles past their stops. Our engines screamed in protest, but we pivoted like a ballet dancer, missing the destroyer's bow by less than 10 feet. As we passed, I emptied a full belt of ammunition into their bridge at point-blank range, seeing sparks fly as bullets struck home. PT-171 wasn't as lucky. Joey Antonelli had lined up perfect shots on the third transport, but a Japanese destroyer caught them with searchlights before they could fire. The enemy's 25mm cannons found their mark, stitching a line of holes across PT-171's bow. One shell hit a torpedo, but miraculously it didn't detonate. The warhead needed to be armed by spinning in water before it would explode. Still, Joey had to abort his attack run and flee, streaming smoke and taking on water. We came around for another pass, but the element of surprise was gone. Every searchlight in the Japanese convoy was now sweeping the water, and guns of every caliber were firing in all directions. The water around us was torn by so many shell splashes it looked like a rainstorm. Worse, the Japanese had finally gotten their 5-in guns into action, and those could blow us to splinters with a single hit. "Launch remaining fish and get us out of here," Max shouted over the den. Patty fired our last 2 Mark 13 torpedoes at the